There's a line, often invisible but deeply felt, between loneliness and solitude. And for a woman with no friends, that line can become a battlefield. One side whispers shame and the other holds quiet strength. But before anyone can cross it, they must first understand the difference between the two. Loneliness is heavy. It presses against the chest like a weight you can't shake off. It doesn't just exist in an empty room. It follows you into crowded spaces, into family gatherings, into moments where laughter surrounds you but never includes you. For a woman with no friends, loneliness can feel like the echo of being forgotten. It's not about simply being alone. It's about feeling unwanted, unseen, uninvited. It cuts not because there's silence, but because there's silence where connection should be. She might scroll through her phone and see other women smiling together, celebrating birthdays, leaning on one another through heartbreaks. And she wonders what's wrong with her. She replays conversations in her head, questions her worth, and convinces herself that something inside her must be broken. That's loneliness. It isolates. It convinces you that your value is tied to someone else choosing you. Solitude is a decision. It's presence within absence. It's when a woman turns down the noise of the world, not because no one's calling, but because she chooses to listen to her own voice. Solitude is not born from rejection, but from reflection. It's the place where she sits with her own thoughts, not to punish herself, but to understand herself. It's where she starts to rebuild. Solitude doesn't sting like loneliness. It steadies, it sharpens, it gives her back her time, her mind, her boundaries. In solitude, she doesn't question if she matters. She reclaims that answer for herself. She learns that her peace is not dependent on how many people text her or how many plans she has for the weekend. She starts to enjoy her own company, and in that quiet, she meets herself again. The shift from loneliness to solitude isn't instant. It takes time. It takes emotional honesty. It takes staring down the hurt of being left out and deciding not to let it define her. It takes letting go of the need for approval, the hunger to be liked, the pain of not being chosen. She has to feel every part of that before she can rise into solitude. And rising isn't always graceful. Some days it's messy. Some days it hurts more before it heals. But there's a power that comes when she stops seeing her emptiness as a problem and starts seeing it as space. Space to breathe, space to grow, space to fill with truth instead of noise. Because in solitude, she doesn't just find peace. She finds herself. She doesn't just learn how to be alone. She learns that she is enough even when no one else is around to remind her. She wakes up every morning and puts herself together like armor. The clothes, the smile, the carefully chosen words. From the outside, she looks fine, composed, capable, even strong. But inside, she's carrying more than anyone sees. Because her pain doesn't scream, it whispers. And that's what makes it so hard to notice. Silent struggles are the kind that don't get talked about in group chats or over coffee with friends. Not because they aren't real, but because there's no one there to talk to. A woman with no friends often becomes her own therapist, her own cheerleader, her own crisis hotline. She breaks down quietly, behind bathroom doors, in parked cars, under the covers late at night when the world goes still. There are no shoulders to lean on, no one asking, "Are you okay?" Not because they don't care, but because they don't even know what she's carrying. Some people wear their pain loudly. She doesn't. She's mastered the art of masking. She knows how to keep her voice steady when her heart is shaking. She knows how to show up, to smile, to say all the right things, while a war is happening inside her. And the hardest part, no one sees it. There's no applause for surviving the day when the battle is invisible. No comfort for tears no one knows she cries. She struggles with things people wouldn't expect. The ache of not having someone to call when she gets good news. The hesitation before she tries something new because there's no one to support her if she falls. The fear of getting sick, not just because of the illness, but because she'd have to face it alone. It's the loneliness of celebration and the loneliness of suffering. The silence that follows every, I wish I had someone. And then there's the shame, the quiet belief that her loneliness must be her fault. That if she were better, prettier, funnier, more interesting, someone would have stayed. That somehow she caused her isolation. She replays past friendships, wondering what she did wrong, even when she gave everything. That's the cruelty of silent struggles. They don't just hurt, they accuse. They don't just isolate, they lie. They make her believe she's not just alone, she's unworthy. But still she moves, she works, she helps others. She shows up for people who wouldn't notice if she disappeared. She carries her own emotional weight and sometimes even carries the weight of others just to feel connected. She has dreams, but no one to speak them aloud to. She has pain, but no one to share it with. Her life happens in silence, not because she wants it that way, but because it's become the only way she knows. And so she adapts. She learns to nod and smile when someone says, "You're so strong," unaware that strength wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. She's learned how to hold it all together because breaking down in front of no one is lonelier than holding it in. Before the silence, there was noise, laughter that felt real, conversations that felt safe, people who seemed like they'd stay. But that was before the judgment, before the rejection, before she realized that even good intentions don't always lead to lasting connections. Judgment doesn't always come with loud words or direct insults. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet pauses, the side glances, the subtle shift in tone when someone finds out who she really is or who they think she is. A single mistake, a misunderstood sentence, or even just showing too much of herself can trigger the exit. Suddenly, people pull away and she's left standing there, wondering what she did wrong. Again, for a woman with no friends, this isn't just about people walking away. It's about the emotional aftermath. It's the internal replay of conversations, the self-doubt that creeps in, the fear of showing too much next time. Rejection becomes more than a moment, it becomes a lens. Every interaction is filtered through it. Every new acquaintance is approached with caution. Will they stay? Will they leave? What version of herself is safe enough to show? She's been labeled before. Too sensitive, too much, too quiet, too intense. And labels like that stick. They shape how others see her and eventually how she sees herself. She begins to silence parts of who she is, not because they're wrong, but because they've been judged so many times. It feels safer to hide them. And it's not always strangers. Sometimes the deepest cuts come from people she trusted. Friends she shared secrets with, family who dismissed her pain, rejection that comes from those who once embraced her feels like betrayal wearing a familiar face. It's not just that they left, it's how easily they did. It's how they made her feel like she was the problem. There's a particular kind of loneliness that grows from repeated rejection. It's not just being alone, it's anticipating abandonment. It's walking into new rooms already bracing for the moment she won't be accepted. So she stops entering those rooms. She avoids vulnerability. She becomes guarded. Not because she wants to be distant, but because being open has cost her too much. Judgment has a way of distorting memory. She forgets the moments she was loved and only remembers the times she was left. She forgets the parts of herself that are worthy and starts focusing on what she thinks she needs to fix. It becomes a cycle. Hide who you are to be accepted, get rejected anyway, blame yourself for being unlovable. Even when someone tries to get close, she second guesses their intention. She wonders if they're just being polite. She doubts that they could truly want to know her because others didn't. And after a while, rejection stops feeling like an event. It starts feeling like a pattern, like proof, not that people failed her, but that something in her must be inherently wrong. So she shrinks, she withdraws, and she tells herself it's better not to try than to be hurt again. When people talk about strength, they often picture boldness, loud voices, big wins, powerful stances. But there's another kind of strength, one that doesn't make noise, one that doesn't need recognition, the kind that grows in the quiet when no one is watching, the kind of woman discovers when she has no one else to lean on but herself. Inner strength is built in the silence after rejection. It's formed in the long nights when tears come and there's no one to wipe them away. It's in the mornings when she gets out of bed, not because she feels ready, but because life doesn't stop. She shows up, she handles her responsibilities, and she keeps going, not for applause, but because giving up is not an option. She allows herself to take. A woman with no friends isn't weak. She may be isolated, but she's not broken. She's had to learn how to survive emotionally without backup. There's no one checking in on her, no one texting her to see how her day went. She's the one giving herself pep talks. She's the one picking herself back up after disappointment. She's the one finding meaning in moments no one else shares with her. Inner strength doesn't look like what the world expects. It's not flashy. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it's her taking a deep breath and walking into a room full of people she doesn't know. Sometimes it's her saying no to things that no longer serve her, even if it means being even more alone. Sometimes it's simply getting through the day without letting the weight crush her. There's power in knowing that your survival has nothing to do with anyone else's permission. She's learned that. She's learned how to stand her ground when people try to define her. She's learned how to rebuild after being broken. She's learned that resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn through pain, through quiet victories, through every single time she wanted to give up but didn't. She stopped looking for saviors. She stopped waiting for someone to come along and rescue her from the heaviness. Inner strength has taught her that she is both the fire and the shelter, that no one is coming to fix what she has to face, that her healing is her own. And while it may feel unfair, it's also incredibly powerful. People don't see the miles she's walked emotionally. They don't see how many times she's had to forgive herself, encourage herself, choose herself. And maybe they never will, but she knows what it's taken to keep going. She knows how hard it is to face disappointment and keep her heart open anyway. She knows that strength isn't about how loudly you live, but how deeply you endure when no one's watching and nothing is easy. There's something deeply human about the need to be seen, not just noticed, but truly recognized. To have someone look beyond the surface and say, I see you, I hear you, you matter. For a woman with no friends, that kind of recognition is not just rare, it's often non-existent. And in that absence, something begins to wither, not her capabilities, not her intelligence, but her sense of worth. She can go through entire days without hearing her name spoken with warmth. She can walk into rooms where no one acknowledges her presence, where she becomes just another face, another body passing through. The world moves fast, and she's learned to move with it. But there's a quiet ache that grows every time she feels invisible. Not being seen doesn't just hurt. It disconnects. It makes her question whether she's real in the eyes of others or just background noise in a life filled with louder, brighter people. Being seen isn't about vanity. It's not about needing validation in the form of compliments or attention. It's about connection. It's about having someone who notices when something's off. Someone who picks up on the change in her voice, the hesitation in her smile, the silence where there used to be words. It's about having someone say, "You don't seem okay. Talk to me." For many women without friends, that kind of intimacy doesn't exist. So they carry the weight alone. Over time, not being seen can turn into something dangerous. It becomes easy to believe that she doesn't deserve to be noticed, that her pain isn't valid, her joy isn't worth sharing, her presence doesn't make a difference. The mirror becomes the only place where her reflection lives, and even that starts to feel distant. She shows up to work, to responsibilities, to obligations, but not to life, not fully. Because when no one sees you, it's hard to keep showing up as yourself. Even in spaces meant for community, churches, offices, social gatherings, she can feel isolated. The conversations around her don't include her, or if they do, they stay on the surface. People speak, but they don't ask. They smile, but they don't look. And when she walks away, nothing lingers. No one follows up. No one remembers. It's like she was never there to begin with. But being seen is not about popularity. It's about intimacy. One person can change everything. One honest conversation, one moment of someone holding eye contact long enough to make her feel real again. One person who says, "I've been where you are. You're not alone." The lack of that voice creates a void. And in that void, she starts to shrink, not in body, but in spirit. She stops raising her hand, stops sharing her thoughts, stops trying to connect. Because if no one's listening, why speak? If no one's watching, why reveal? She doesn't need the world to see her. Just one person, one soul who doesn't look through her or around her, but directly at her. Someone who isn't afraid of her truth, her depth, her silence, or her story. For a long time, she believed the story she was handed, the one shaped by silence, by absence, by the quiet sting of being overlooked. The story that said she wasn't interesting enough, likable enough, lovable enough. When people left, she wrote it off as confirmation. When she sat alone at lunch or went weekends without a single call or message, she internalized it. She made it mean something about her, not about circumstance, not about timing, about her worth. That's how most narratives begin, not with facts, but with feelings, with assumptions built in the dark corners of rejection. She convinced herself she was invisible, and so she began to act like she was. She avoided speaking up. She held back her truth. She dressed to blend in, spoke to please, and shrank in the presence of others. The world didn't tell her to do that. Her story did. A story she didn't write, but one she had lived so long. It felt like the only truth that existed. But there comes a point, sometimes quietly, sometimes through the force of pain, when a woman begins to question the script. She starts to separate what actually happened from what she made it mean. Maybe they left, but that doesn't mean she's unworthy. Maybe no one checked on her, but that doesn't mean she's forgettable. Maybe she's been alone, but that doesn't mean she's broken. Slowly, she realizes the story isn't final. It's just familiar, and familiarity isn't truth. Rewriting the narrative doesn't require a sudden transformation. It begins in fragments. In the moment she chooses to show up to the gathering, even if she feels out of place. In the moment she speaks her opinion, even if her voice shakes. In the moment she walks past the mirror and doesn't flinch at her own reflection, she starts to choose different meanings, different words. She stops asking, why doesn't anyone love me? And starts asking, what do I need to love about myself right now? The rewrite is difficult, not because she isn't capable, but because the old story is so deeply ingrained. It was her protection, her explanation for the pain. Letting it go means facing what's underneath: disappointment, loss, fear. But she faces it anyway. She begins to write with intention, this time with her own voice. This time not as a side character in someone else's story, but as the central figure in her own. She doesn't erase the past. She doesn't deny what happened, but she reframes it. She stops seeing herself as the woman nobody wanted and starts seeing herself as the woman who outgrew the places that couldn't hold her. She stops carrying the belief that silence equals shame and starts seeing it as space for clarity. With every sentence she rewrites, she becomes more of who she really is, not the version edited by pain, but the one defined by choice, courage, and a vision of something better. So if you see a woman walking alone, don't assume she's broken. Don't assume she's bitter or cold or hard to love. Behind her silence is a story. Behind her strength is a struggle. She's walked through loneliness, battled rejection, carried wounds no one asked about, and still she stands. She didn't choose isolation, but she chose not to be destroyed by it. Yes, she has no friends, but she has something even more powerful. She has herself. She's learned to be her own peace in the chaos, her own comfort in the pain, her own voice in the silence. She's rewritten the story they tried to leave her with, and in doing so, she's become something unshakable. A woman like that doesn't need a crowd to be complete. She doesn't need applause to know her worth. Because the truth is, some of the strongest women you'll ever meet are the ones who stood alone and never stopped rising.